Please welcome from the United States, Thomas Friedman, multiple Pulitzer Prize winner, author, columnist with the New York Times. Thanks very much, Tom Friedman, for joining me here on the India Today Conclave. In 2005, Mr. Friedman, you wrote a seminal book, The World is Flat. 16 years later, if I were to ask you to write a book on the world as it stands today in these pandemic times, how would you describe the world?
Well, first of all, it's great to be back with you for the India Today Conclave. Rajdeep, thank you. Well, I would not be able to do it in one phrase. One thing I would say is that it's flatter than ever. I'm sitting in Palo Alto, California, and I'm having a low latency dialogue with you all the way over in India. And I think even when I wrote The World is Flat, I didn't quite imagine this. But, you know, how would I maybe describe it? I think that I would use 5 different adjectives this time, Rajdeep. I would say, first of all, the world is really fast. The pace of change just keeps on accelerating as this ecosystem of microchips, bandwidth, sensors, software, machine learning just keeps cycling faster and faster. So the world is getting fast. Second, I would say the world's getting fused. It's getting fused by both climate change. We're now all really experiencing the same kind of weather extremes, and being fused by telecommunications, the kind of thing we're doing right now. Third, the world's getting really deep. You may have noticed that we suddenly added the adjective deep to everything. You know, there's no global lexicographer who ordered that, but we suddenly intuited that, wow, that's not just a faith, that's a deep faith. That's not just normal medicine, that's deep medicine. That's toggling my DNA. And that has to do with the fact that technology is going and taking us to places that are so deep, even government doesn't know where we are. It's getting radically open. With this little device here, everyone can be a publisher, a filmmaker, a paparazzi, an editor. The world is incredibly open for everyone to comment on. That has a wonderful upside, and it has some very dark downsides for what it means for establishing the truth. And lastly, it's getting really smart. That we have built machines now that are beyond anything our human brains have evolved. And so if you ask me what the big trends are shaping the world, it's this notion of getting fast, fused, deep, open, and smart all at the same time, and the economic and the political and the geopolitical ramifications of that.
I'll come to the geopolitics a little later, Thomas Friedman, but let me, in a way, try and contest what you said. You seem to suggest that, you know, in a very positive way, the glass half full, you say the world is still flat. What if I said that the pandemic, in a way, has shown that the world is actually now more divided, both within and outside? The pandemic has affected us all, but very differently. More unequal, therefore, in terms of opportunities, access to basic facilities, be it healthcare or education. In a country like India, I see that the digital divide only gets accentuated depending on where you live and your income levels. In the United States, we've seen people outside food ration shops, you know, the kind of scenes that we'd never thought we'd see in the United States. So I'm just wondering, actually, has the pandemic shown us up to be a grossly unequal society where opportunities are very different and access to seemingly basic facilities like healthcare and indeed education depend on income levels squarely?
Well, that's a perfectly a good question. It has nothing to do with my book, though, because when I said flat, when I used the term flat, it was not a synonym for equal. When I wrote The World is Flat, it was that we had created basically a telecommunications platform on which more people in more places could compete, connect, and collaborate on more things for less money in more ways on more days than ever before. That was how I used the term flat, but it was not in any way to suggest that things would be equal. In some ways, it made the world more unequal. In some ways, less equal. But it all depends what you do with that platform. But it has nothing to do with the end of inequality in the world or different courses that countries would take. It's all about what you do with that platform. And what the pandemic, really, shows us, obviously, is that it does what you said. It exposes inequalities around the world, brings them into stark relief. It was like a giant global stress test, but it had nothing to do with the thesis I was arguing before, which was really a technological argument. That my view has always been, people say, I'm a technological determinist. I say, well, yes, I am in this sense that I believe if people have the technology, that I can sit in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley and connect to an audience in India, that they will use that technology. Whether we will use it to promote healthy ideas, consensus, or hate and venom, that's a whole nother question. I'm not a determinist about that at all. And so that's all about what values you bring to this platform.
Right. Because the sense of being a superpower for the longest time was defined by military mind. Then it became about technology and whether a society had the technological power to become a superpower. The pandemic, Thomas Friedman has suggested that even some of the most powerful countries in the world, including where you are, the United States, you've had more than 500,000 deaths due to COVID and counting. Has it revealed the limitations, in a sense, of the superpower power? That at the end of the day, here comes a pandemic, a once-in-a-century pandemic, and the mighty United States also struggles to, in a way, combat the after effects because its healthcare system at one level is also exposed. A soft center is found in this seeming superpower.
Well, it's a good question, and the way I would say, I think what it exposed is not only the weakness of the United States, and we didn't respond well, but actually the power of Mother Nature. And I think that that's one thing, the pandemic was a natural systems event. And our president at the time when it broke out, Donald Trump, is someone who had no experience with natural systems. He looked at the world through markets. The only experience he had with natural systems was building golf courses where he put waterfalls in. So he actually thought he could tame nature. And what the pandemic taught him and anyone else who didn't understand this is that Mother Nature is just chemistry, biology, and physics. That's all she is. She's just chemistry, biology, and physics. And she will do whatever chemistry, biology, and physics dictate. And she always bats last, to put it in cricket terms, and she always bats 1,000. So do not mess with Mother Nature. Now, the pandemic, the COVID-19, the coronavirus was one of the many fastballs that Mother Nature throws at us to sort out who is the fittest. Who will get their DNA into the next generation. She's quite brutal about this. And when she throws a kind of virus like this at humans, she basically asks three questions. The question one is, do you respect my virus? Do you respect my virus? And if you don't respect it, I will hurt you or someone you love. Second, she asks, are you coordinated in your response to my virus? Because if you're not coordinated, because Mother Nature evolved this virus over millennia to find any crack in your immune system. So are you coordinated in your response? And lastly, she asks, in your response, is your response built around chemistry, biology, and physics, or an election campaign and an ideology? Because if it's built around an election campaign and an ideology, not chemistry, biology, and physics, I will hurt you or someone you love. Now, what the pandemic exposed in America was a significant portion of the country did not want to respond in a coordinated way and did not want to respond with chemistry, biology, and physics, but with ideology and a political election calendar. And when you do that with another superpower, maybe you'll get away with it. When you do that with the mother of all superpowers, Mother Nature, well, she's just chemistry, biology, and physics, baby, and she will make you pay.
I love that. Mother Nature is the mother of all superpowers, because for the longest time, we thought it was about military might, as I said. Then for a while we thought if you had the economic power, you became a superpower. Then I said it was about technology. In a way, has this forced us to sort of relook at the seeming models that existed? Because look at Europe, Thomas Friedman spends on an average 11% of their GDP on healthcare, and then look at sub-Saharan Africa, or indeed South Asia and even India, where we spend a fraction of that. So I'm just wondering whether the definitions of superpower also need to change, as you say, as Mother Nature is found as the mother of all powers, that the Human Development Index, in a sense, is going to define a country's power perhaps much more now than ever before.
Well, there's no question that the age we're going into, resilience. Let me put it this way. I tend to look at the world through the prism of natural systems. So in natural systems, when the climate changes, who thrives and who doesn't? In natural systems, the ecosystems that produce complex adaptive networks, where all the elements of the network, all the elements of the ecosystem network together to enhance their resilience and propulsion, ability to grow and move forward. Well, I think it's true with also human systems. We're in the middle of 3 climate changes in what once. We're in the middle of change of the climate of the climate. We're in the middle of change of the climate of technology right now. And we're in the middle of the change of the climate of globalization. You and I are demonstrating that right now, okay? We're going through 3 climate changes at once. And to me, the countries, the communities, the companies that will thrive when the climate changes are those that produce what I call complex adaptive coalitions, where all the elements of the political or social ecosystem work together to maximize their resilience and propulsion. And those that don't, Mother Nature will have her way with them. And she has no problem dealing with her bad biological experiments by returning them to the manufacturer. Okay, and she'll do that with human communities, and she'll do that with natural ecosystems.
So, your big thesis on globalization, as you expressed in The World is Flat, do you believe now that because of the pandemic, will the world be more interconnected in a way, or will societies sort of will withdraw inwards, will look within and first settle problems in the neighborhood before they look at settling problems a million miles away? Is that the way you see the world in the next decade in particular?
A very good question. And the answer is yes. That is, it's going to be both. So that what the pandemic is doing is forcing companies, including India today, to dramatically digitize their systems in 1 year that they would have done 10 years. Like this conversation we're having, Rajdeep, this probably would have happened without a pandemic 5 years from now. You never would have thought of us doing this. I'm in a hotel room in Palo Alto, okay? So the pandemic has dramatically accelerated digitization. I was walking, I work out of the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. I happened to bump into our editor, Washington editor, on the street outside of my favorite Indian restaurant, actually, in DC. And we bumped into each other, and she said, "Tom, I'm sorry, I'm in a hurry. I have to go home and get back to work." I said, "What did you say?" She said, "I have to go home and get back to work." Okay. We were standing outside our office, which has been closed for basically 2 years. So that shows you what a mind shift that has happened. It's entered the language, our vocabulary. I have to go home and get back to work. So that's a product of the pandemic. But the pandemic also, as you say, has exposed these tensions. It's exposed gulfs. It's like, Warren Buffett said, when the tide goes out, you see who's wearing a bathing suit and who isn't. And the pandemic was a tide like that. And it shows you who has a good healthcare system and who doesn't. Who has politics where people can collaborate and work together under stress and who doesn't. So it really exposed all of those things. It's not either or, but the world's going to get more digitized as a result of the pandemic, and as a result, more fused, and it's going to expose fissures wider and wider.
Let's turn from there for a moment to geopolitics. Thomas Friedman, your views on what's been the other big story of 2021 globally, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, leaving a country after 9/11 with a 20-year presence, military presence in the area. How do you see that exit from Afghanistan? Because during his speech in the United Nations, the US President Joe Biden said, "I'm now going to move from a world of relentless wars to a new era of relentless diplomacy." Is that how you see the world now, focusing much more on trade blocs than focusing on sort of fighting wars in different parts of the world?
Well, there's no question that the whole post 9/11 war on terrorism, I think is over. I think they'll be treated much more as a police issue, intelligence issue than some kind of military intervention issue. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was as the president said himself, it was messy. There's no good way to lose a war, and that's what this was. At the same time, I mean, I wish the Afghans well, but I think you're going to see America turn much more inward. And to the extent that it's externally focused, it'll be focused on both the economic and geoeconomic competition with China, and not on wars of terrorism, unless, again, something happens tomorrow. So who can predict? But the general, what Biden did was enormously popular. I think in America, getting out of Afghanistan. How he did it was another issue, and that was because Americans don't like to see a mess, and it was a mess. But I think that to the extent that there is a focus, it will be on the geoeconomic competition with China. But the fact is that right now America is in a bad way. Our ability to act as one, to pull together, to do big, hard things together, has really been badly frayed. And we can say we're going to now compete with China, but actually to agree on the education, the infrastructure, the budgeting, the healthcare, what is the global overall strategy of doing that? We don't have that right now.
Are you saying it's a diminished America, as some editorials now seem to suggest? Is that how you would see it? That this is we already sense that this was the end of the American century, as some have called it, but do you see it as a diminished America today?
Well, the way I see it is, I did an interview with Anderson Cooper on CNN, I don't know, it was either right before or right after the election, and he asked me how I felt, Rajdeep. And I said, Anderson, I'm going to give you an answer as if English were my second language. But this is what comes up in me. Country not right. Country not right. Country not right. My country's not right. We have Lindsey Graham, a senator from South Carolina, conservative Republican, was speaking at a political event in his state last week. And he had just contracted COVID-19 and had recovered. And he said, I urge you, he was speaking to a Republican audience, and he began by saying, I urge you all to get, and before he could even utter the word vaccinated, they began to boo him. And as he finished the sentence, they booed him even larger. We are in a grip of a kind of madness that I think is a product of cable television, social media, and political polarization. We are not just polarized in America today. We are hyperpolarized. And as a result, we're losing our cognitive immunity, our ability to sort out fact from fiction. We live in the most amazing age in the world where a year after pandemic, our scientific infrastructure was able to produce an effective vaccine. That's remarkable. And in such an age, we have people booing a senator who's from their own party for having gotten vaccinated. That's a madness that I have never experienced in my country. And that's why I say to you, country not right, country not right.
You're saying country not right, country not right. There will be, and you use the word hyperpolarized, which is a word that is now increasingly used, not just about the United States, but the world in general. I mean, we are seeing the rise of right-wing nationalisms, particularly across Europe, but even in this part of the world, including a sort of xenophobic nationalism directed, looking at the enemy, looking for an enemy. For the longest time, it was seen as Islam as the enemy. In a way, today with the rise of the Taliban, many are again seeing Islam and Islamic terrorism as the rise of the new enemy, which feeds in turn into a certain right-wing xenophobic nationalism. Do you believe that? That that's how the world is getting hyperpolarized, where increasingly, once again, Islam will be seen as the prime enemy, and Islamic terrorism, every time it erupts in some part of the world, will result in even further polarization?
Well, you've asked kind of two questions there, so let me disaggregate them. Okay. The first is why this polarization is happening. And I think, speaking of America, I kind of see America as a boiling pot. And in the middle of the pot are the American people. And what's boiling them actually goes back to what I said earlier: fast, fused, deep, open, and smart. That is, we're going through a really destabilizing change in how we learn, how we earn, how we work, where we work. This alone, just in the most ideal political environment, would be destabilizing. But then underneath the pot, somebody's really turning up the flame. And in my view, they're called Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, and Fox News and Rupert Murdoch and cable TV from left and right. And they're turning up the flame. Then along came a guy named Donald Trump, and he took the lid off the pot. And he said, you know what? Calling people vile names, that's fine. That's okay. He made permissible to talk about other people as a politician things that were never permissible before. To claim an election was a complete fraud without an ounce of proof. He took the lid off a pot that was now being boiled at the bottom by social networks and cable television and the like. And in the middle, you've got these people going through this incredible transition. So that's America. Now, the only thing I would say about India is that, and I'm a well-known Indiophile. And here's why I'm an Indiophile. I've always said that India was a miracle. A miracle. 1.3, 1.4 billion people speaking over 100 different languages, multi-religious, having free and fair elections on a regular basis. Do you know what the world would be like if India were like Syria today? What the whole world would be like? It would affect the whole world. India is a miracle. And all I say today, I'm not going to get into your politics, is I hope you appreciate that miracle. I hope you nurture that miracle. I hope you respect that miracle, because it got India where it is today. And a pluralistic India is not only hugely important for Indians, it's hugely important for the world.
I'm going to call it Indian exceptionalism, because for the longest time, you've called it American exceptionalism. There's something exceptional in a sense, but obviously some of these forces that in a way sort of keep haunting the world order continue to challenge it. Should be worrying. I read a recent article of yours where you said after the war on terror, post-Afghanistan, it's probably going to be an era of the war on China. Just as you say India is a miracle, how do you therefore see China and the rise of China fitting in to this new 21st century world order?
Well, I think China today is making decisions that are incredibly dangerous, first and foremost, for the future of China. What are those decisions? So I'll just take you under the hood for a second. I'm here in Palo Alto. Actually, I'm studying the future of the microchip industry for my next book. Let me tell you what is the greatest, most successful microchip manufacturer in the world. It's actually a company called TSMC, and it's based in Taiwan.
That's right.
Now, Taiwan is a barren rock in a typhoon-laden sea, and yet it has the richest, leading-edge microchip company in the world. Across the Straits of Taiwan is a country of 1.4 billion people. Same ethnicity, eat the same food, speak the same language. They have been trying to lead the microchip industry to make logic chips better than anyone in the world, and they can't do it, okay? They can't do it. They've spent billions of dollars, but across the Straits of Taiwan is this barren rock in a typhoon-laden sea, and they've figured it out. And if you want to know why China wants to invade Taiwan, 50% of it is to get a hold of TSMC. So what is TSMC's secret? They call it, I think, the TSMC way. They're the most collaborative company in the world. They collaborate and partner with everybody. and they bring together that ecosystem in Taiwan. Now, what is China doing? Okay, it is alienating through its wolf warrior diplomats and everyone, alienating everyone. Let's just look at Australia. Australia says, "Say, excuse me, Mr. China, could you tell us like how this pandemic started? Because it was a really bad thing for us." And they said, "You're asking that? Oh, okay. We're not buying your beef. We're not buying your wine. It's whoa, wait a minute. I just want to know where the pandemic started." Okay. So they are becoming the least collaborative country in the world. Then inside what they're doing, imagine, Rajdeep, if I told you in 2008, I picked up the New York Times and the front page story said that Steve Jobs has disappeared. Holy mackerel. Steve Jobs has disappeared. Well, the Steve Jobs of China, his name is Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, has basically disappeared. Now, what do you think that does for collaboration inside their tech ecosystem? So both internally and externally, China, I would argue, is eroding the most important ingredient in a 21st century world and country, and that is the ability to collaborate with others, because no one can do this alone. And the example of TSMC in China, I think, is very, very stark. And if I were President Xi Jinping, I would be studying that.
Now, are you therefore saying there are limits on the rise of China, in a sense, limits on the Chinese expansionism, because it is inherently a non-collaborative society, an authoritarian society, and therefore will never really be fully accepted, or always will be seen suspiciously, especially in the post-pandemic world, and therefore there will be limits on China's power?
Well, I wouldn't quite go that far. I would simply say it's I'm going to go back to my nature thing. In the middle of a climate change, and our world's going through multiple technological and natural climate changes, it is your ability to collaborate, to build complex adaptive coalitions, because when technology is changing this fast, nobody can own that. Why did Intel was our most famous company. I'm one of our most famous companies in the world. Do you know, Intel went in the tank over the last 10 years. And you know why? Because they decided they were going to build their microchips from end to end without collaborating with others. And I tell you what China is doing today, internally and externally. Why did all those China came from nowhere and had created these amazing new tech companies, Baidu, Tencent, Alibaba, Meituan. And you know why? Because it looked like an authoritarian country from the outside, but inside the government said, hey, you guys in the tech industry, do whatever you want. It was actually the Wild West there. Just don't write an op-ed piece in India today attacking the government, okay? Those were kind of the rules, all right? But do whatever you want inside. So they were like massively collaborating, working, starting, going really fast. And then one day the government woke up and said, whoa, you mean you want to give loans on Alibaba outside the government banking system? Bam. And suddenly Jack Ma disappears. It's sort of like the government discovered their tech industry suddenly and is squashing what enabled that tech industry to go so big so fast. And I don't know where that goes. I'm not in the prediction business. All I am in the business of is saying, here's what I see successful companies and countries doing. And I tell you, Mr. China, you are fighting that trend.
So do you see that for the world in a way, forming these security strategic alliances, keeping China in mind, much as in the Cold War era, they were kept in mind, keeping the Soviets and the then USSR in mind? Do you see that happening? We're seeing it, for example, with the Quad. Do you see China being sort of encircled in a way because the world at the end of the day recognizes that China could be a threat?
Well, I hope not, but I'll tell you why. Look, the era 1979 to 2019 was an epic in U.S.-China relations. It was an epic. And it was actually an epic that I call the epic of unconscious integration. If you were an American company, you wanted to do business in China, you could just do it without thinking about it, send your kid to school there. If you were Chinese, you could do it, start a company in America, send your kid to school in America. And over those 40 years, America and China became the real one country, two systems. We were the real one country, two systems, not Hong Kong, okay? That integration drove two things. It drove a remarkable era of prosperity, prosperity in which India participated as well. Millions of people came out of poverty in that 40-year epoch, and it drove a lot of global peace. There was no great power war that can really destabilize the world. So I have a certain affection for 4 decades that bring so many people out of poverty and bring so much world peace. We will miss it when it's gone. Now, why is it fraying? It's fraying for 2 reasons. 30 of those 40 years, Rajdeep, China sold us what I call shallow goods. Shallow goods, goods we wore on our back, on our feet, on our ankles, on our head, or solar panels we put on our roof. And when China sold us shallow goods, we said, we don't care whether you are authoritarian, libertarian, or vegetarian. We don't really care, okay? Because we're just buying your shallow goods. But what happened in the last 10 years are 2 things. One, China could make deep goods. That's what Huawei represents. Whoa. Deep goods? You mean goods that go in? They had to buy our deep goods because they didn't have them, software and computers. Now they can make deep goods. And we're saying, wait a minute, you're Huawei? You mean you want that in my chatbot, in my bedroom, in my sidewalk, in my telecommunications? We don't have the trust relationship to buy your deep goods. That's what started the conflict with the United States. And second, Xi Jinping came in, and China today is so much more open than it was 40 years ago, but it's so more closed than it was 6 years ago. There was a real U-turn. And the combination of those 2 things has bred a mistrust in the US-China relationship, which I do not celebrate. The world will miss it when it's gone, baby. You do not want to see that world of a breakdown between the US and China. You will miss it when it's gone.
So what do you see as the next big conflict? You know, for a long time, we were told there was going to be this civilizational conflict that would sort of tear apart the world. Then there was the economic conflict between the haves and the have-nots. How do you see now, in the 21st century, conflicts being reshaped in this post-pandemic world? What do you see as a primary conflict looking ahead?
So that goes back to the book I wrote before The World is Flat, which was called Lexus and the Olive Tree. And that book was written right at the end of the Cold War in the late 90s, at a time when everyone was asking, what is the system? They were asking the question you're asking, Rajdeep. What is the system that will replace the Cold War system? And there were several theses put out. Frank Fukuyama said it will be the end of history, the triumph of free markets and free systems. That didn't work out. Sam Huntington said it'll be the clash of civilizations. That didn't work out. We see more clashes within civilizations. Look at Sunnis and Shiites in Afghanistan right now. The third was a guy named Robert Kaplan who said it'll be the coming anarchy. Well, some, but not all. The fourth was an argument that I put out. And I said, basically, it's going to be an interaction between 2 things, the Lexus and the olive tree. The olive tree was my metaphor for all the things that provide sort of social solidarity, our quest for tribe, nation, family, sect, community. And those are our olive trees, these things that anchor us in the world, interacting with what's really new, this globalization system. And the story of the world politics will be the interaction between the 2. So sometimes Russia will seize Crimea, but Putin won't go to Kiev. Why won't he go to Kiev? Because the globalization system, suppresses that. I still consider to this day one of the greatest acts of leadership was after the attack on the Taj Hotel in Mumbai. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh never really fully retaliated for that. It was an act of incredible restraint. By the way, he's one of my real heroes. I think he's one of the truly giant leaders of the last 50 years. And he was weighing all these things. He found a way to do something militarily more symbolic than otherwise. But you didn't do what we did, frankly. We went and invaded Afghanistan. He showed a lot of restraint. And that was partly this tension between the Lexus and the olive tree and how it came out. And so that's how I see, that's the lens through which I look at world politics today.
Very interesting, the way you're sort of describing how the world is evolving. If I were to look ahead to the 3 biggest challenges that you see over the next decade, climate change, the COP meeting takes place in Glasgow in a few weeks from now, and there's a general sense, particularly in this part of the world, that we still haven't understood just what that challenge would be. Is that one of the primary challenges? If I were to ask you three challenges, would it be climate change and a couple of others? What would be those three challenges?
Well, the first obviously is climate change, because we're at a very dangerous moment now. And that's what the last year we're not just seeing extreme weather, we're seeing hyper extreme weather. And we're seeing 100-year events every 3 years. And what that's telling us is that, Mother Nature has a lot of absorptive capacity, ability to absorb, stresses and adapt. But what we're seeing is that her adaptive capacities now are being extinguished in a lot of areas. And what happens then is things flip. That is, the Amazon can deal with a lot of different, less rain, more deforestation, less deforestation. But at a certain point, it reaches an extreme where it can't adapt anymore, and it just flips into a savanna. Always remember, Mother Nature doesn't need us. We need Mother Nature. So if the Amazon flips from a tropical rainforest to a savanna, she doesn't care. It's now I've got a nice savanna. Everyone who depends on the Amazon, all humans, as a carbon sink, it'll matter a lot.
Plenty of takeaways, including the fact that Mother Nature is the mother of all superpowers, and looking into the future, nothing will matter more than values and true leadership. In a sense, the world is changing, and we need to adjust in a way to this rapidly changing world, as we've seen by having you there in Palo Alto and connecting to the India Today Conclave. You didn't have to make the long journey from the United States to be with us, but it's been wonderful to have you give us this grand sweep, as only you can, of the way the world looks at the moment, and give us a gaze into the future. Thank you so much, Thomas Friedman, for joining us here at the India Today Conclave. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him a very big hand.
Real pleasure.
Real pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.